with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the podcast. Today I have Dr. Wayne Mayer. He is the CEO of When Everything Matters and is a strategic sustainability consultant who advises global companies, governments, and nonprofits. He helps organizations transform business models into authentic, sustainable development partnerships. He brings over 20 years' experience designing and leading corporate sustainability. Dr. Mayer helps clients embed sustainability into governance, culture, and leadership. He works across industries and offers extensive involvement in the mining sector. His approach tethers company practices to megatrends and positions companies as leaders in environmental, social, and governance practices. That's ESG. Dr. Mayer also works as a Duke Corporate Education Educator and serves as a senior fellow at the Duke University Center for International Development and has taught for the Duke Environmental Leadership in Business and Environment programs. He also teaches graduate courses for the University of Denver's Environmental Policy and Management and Global Community Engagement programs. Sir, thank you so much for being with me today. Appreciate your time. Anything else not in your bio that people need to know about you?
I think you covered it quite well. And I'd like to say thank you, Scott, for inviting me to your show. It's a pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed several of your conversations and indeed discovered practical wisdom.
Well, I joke sometimes. I don't know how practical the wisdom is sometimes, but we try.
Yes, it can often be a bit abstract, but I find you can find kernels of great pragmatism.
So, we had spoken, obviously listeners kind of have a sense of your area of expertise here. I've had a few conversations, Steve Kempster, a little bit of Margaret Wheatley, and Ryan Satterwhite with Kathy Allen, just kind of about this general space. But maybe if you would, I know that sustainability is a passion of yours. How are you thinking about sustainability leadership? How are you defining that?
It's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about how organizations think about issues beyond their core focus, and whether that causes mission drift or whether that causes productivity. And if you think about it at the high level, the chief sustainability officers, they're trying to build environmentally conscious firms through strategy and influence. And so I've been thinking a lot about how influence is used in leadership. And they're also trying to interpret changes in the external environment and work out the strategies and opportunities and impacts for their companies as they look at that external environment. So outward in looking as well as inward out looking.
Yeah. Well, and so that's interesting. We've got a few different kind of bodies of literature, so to speak. We've got the sustainability, we've got the strategy, and then at least one way I define leadership is the process of influencing others toward a common vision. So leadership and influence, and so kind of the convergence of these three spaces.
Yes. In fact, I want to pick up on the thread a little bit from Steve Kempster, his ideas around a regenerative approach to business and leadership, and then Kathy Allen's ideas of leading from the roots, and that conversation that you just mentioned about where Kathy and Ryan Satterwhite were speaking together, again, on this idea of regeneration.
Yeah.
And the thread I wanted to pick up on is the idea of looking at business as systems. And how do we take systems thinking into that to bring this regenerative pattern? How do we bring this idea of freshness and newness by looking at things through systems? And what occurred to me that I thought I would offer to you is that I actually studied forestry in the Pacific Northwest, in the state of Washington. And you can't study forestry there without learning a little bit about Chief Seattle. And so he was the leader of the Duwamish and the Squamish people. And famously, he's credited with a speech about ecological responsibility and how do you sell land if you're part of the land. And to sort of paraphrase what he was getting at, he says that all things are connected like blood that unites us all. And that people did not weave the web of life. We merely are a strand in it.
Okay.
And so whatever we do to this web, we do to ourselves. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically the Chief Seattle perspective. And so then you get this idea of a web. And in ecology, we often talk about ecosystems and this web of life. And in fact, the modern concept of systems thinking emerged out of environmental science, which is an interdisciplinary field. And so by nature, it was teaching people to think beyond the categories. So you weren't just thinking about biology or anthropology or chemistry. You were having to learn how all of those disciplines actually interact.
Yes.
And so the late environmental scientist, Donella Meadows, she explains that systems contain three main components: elements, interconnections, and a function or purpose.
Okay.
And you can see systems then in nature, and you can see them in business. And I thought it would be kind of fun to explore that with you around this idea of influence and appreciation. We start looking at this idea of how do we use this idea of systems to identify elements, interconnections, and in physical or ecological systems, we would talk about a function.
Okay.
Or in human systems, like your digestive system, there's a function. But then in business, we might actually think of elements, interconnections, and a purpose. What's the purpose of our system? What are we trying to accomplish?
I love it. Let's do it. I like it.
All right. So a quick way to comprehend systems thinking, it comes from this idea of ecosystems, right? A community of living organisms interacting with each other in their physical environment. And so in a nutshell, that would be an ecosystem. But one way that I think we can frame this that will make it easy to comprehend is sometimes it's helpful to look at these elements by doing the reverse.
Okay.
So we're often looking at what happens to a system if we change this or that. And what I mean by the reverse is, well, if you take an ecosystem and we think it's a natural intact ecosystem, what happens if we reinsert a species that was absent?
Okay.
And so what I thought would be useful to illustrate this is just talk about the reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone National Park. Because it's big, it's grandiose, and I think people get it right away. And then we're going to take that and we're going to think about how that offers us insights into the way we can provide sustainability leadership in business by using this method of systems thinking. And so in 1995, wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park after being absent for about 70 years. And ecologically, it's one of these conservation stories that's quite remarkable because when they reintroduced the wolf, it kind of fell right back into its old role. And what happens is it triggered what scientists call a trophic cascade. A trophic cascade is sort of this top-down influence where you've reintroduced a species, usually a top predator, and it has a cascading effect on different levels of the food chain.
Okay.
So in Yellowstone, it starts with the wolf's prey, the elk. And the wolves start feeding on the elk, bringing the elk population into balance. So before, the elk and bison populations had ballooned over that 70-year period.
Really?
So by the 1980s, the park was so overrun by elk and bison that they were also changing the landscape. They were keeping vegetation low. They were doing a lot of grazing. And so with reintroduction of the wolves, we start seeing the wolf population is putting back into check and into balance the elk population. And as the wolves start feeding on the elk, the downed elk also feed the scavenger community of the wolves, the bears, the coyotes. But it doesn't stop there with these big animals. We start seeing hundreds of beetles and insect species also benefit from the wolf kills. Then there's this incredible ripple effect through the plant life. So before the reintroduction, as I was saying, the elk had no one attacking them, no one hunting them. So they chewed on willow bushes a lot, and they brought the willow trees down to very low levels. So the willow stands didn't grow tall. And with the reintroduction of the wolves, the willow trees began to flourish, and that attracted more songbirds. It also provided food for beaver. The beaver used the willow trees to build dams, which created ponds and wetlands, which created habitat for fish, birds, amphibians, small mammals, moose, mink, otter. So once a meadow turned into a pond, it created a lot of opportunity for life.
Wow.
And so now we can take this idea of an ecosystem of a trophic cascade, and we can start to apply it to the way we do business.
Okay. Interesting. So one parallel could be we get a new CEO and the cascading impacts that has on the organization. Would that be one simplistic example?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And when you start thinking about that, then you say, okay, if we get this new CEO, what's that CEO's leadership style? And in the leadership literature, there's a lot of different ways somebody comes in. Maybe you have a command and control person. Maybe you have a servant leader style. Maybe you have a people-centric leadership style. And so that's going to then have a cascading effect on the whole organization.
Yes.
And so with sustainability, again, it's really a mindset. I like to think of it as a mindset as opposed to a department. So a lot of companies now will have a green team, or they will have a community relations team. And these small groups tend to do fringe projects, or what they'll call initiatives, on the side, on the fringes of whatever the core business is.
Yep.
And when that happens, I call that a bolt-on approach to sustainability.
Okay.
We're just bolting it onto the company because we feel a moral imperative to do so, or we feel that there's some regulatory pressure or stakeholder pressure for us to do so. But it really doesn't have much to do with what we do as an organization.
Okay.
And so for a leader then in sustainability to have that cascading effect, that leader would want to come in and say, okay, we're going to try to embed this sustainability mindset, social and environmental thinking, into everything we do.
Okay.
And that will guide how we make our decisions. And that brings it into the strategic realm.
Okay.
And then in doing so, we're going to be looking for, well, how does what we do affect what others do? So looking for that idea of systems. Where are these systems? A team of people working together is a system. And then you can have systems within systems. And then we're going to look at that external environment. We want to start from that external environment and then work our way back in.
So I'm seeing a really, really nice parallel to leader development right now. So let's see if this lands. It may
Okay.
not.
Well, we're going to try.
Yeah. You know, at times, I think DEI can be this way. I think leader development or leadership can be this way, that you have a leadership program. And, you know, oftentimes the decision makers feel that leadership program will have some type of impact. You know, unless leadership is connected to any number of systems, performance management, succession planning, of course, training and development, but there's a whole host of other elements, whether it's aligned with the 360 that we're going to do, whether it's aligned with how we recruit people to certain values that then we promote as values in a person we want in the organization, or values of what we hope a leader will model. Unless it's connected to a number of those, in this case, like HR systems, many of them, we're going to be super limited in our ability to have that one day-long program have any level of impact. It's going to be much lower unless that programming is connected to these other parts of the system.
And that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yes, you're exactly right. And with that HR example, same thing happens. You end up with a scapegoat department.
Yes. Yeah.
And this happens a lot in sustainability, but you can see it in HR. It wasn't our fault. The green team did it. Why are we over budget? Oh, they're spending money on this project or that project. And so the idea then is to figure out, well, how do we actually shift the way people perceive what we do as an organization?
Yeah. This gets to the Kempster conversation where I think it was Cotswold Dairy, if I'm not mistaken, but it was a dairy company and it was just baked into their DNA as an organization.
That's right.
Everything they did kind of came back to this, to your point, mindset, right?
Exactly right. There's a great quote from Peter Drucker, the American professor of management and leadership. He says, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect of, the task of leadership is to create an alignment of strengths so strong that it makes a system's weaknesses irrelevant.
Wow.
And that's sort of what we're getting at when we talk about embedded sustainability or an embedded mindset.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
So actually from Cleveland, Ohio, I had the great pleasure some years ago of working with Chuck Fowler.
Oh, yeah.
Who's got the, over at Case Western, the Fowler Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit honors his name. And Chuck was the longtime CEO of Fairmont Minerals, which he started, it was called Best Sands, became Fairmont Minerals. And under his leadership, I think it carried all the way to Fairmont Central.
Yeah.
It has since been sold to Covia, and so they're running it. But under Chuck Fowler's leadership, he decided early on, before the Sustainable Development Goals, when the UN had the Millennium Development Goals, that it would be a great idea to embed this idea of the Millennium Development Goals of sustainable development into core strategy.
Yes.
And so they started doing this, and basically they began to spiral around their idea of moving silica sand to market with speed as their core initiative or their core purpose. They started to spiral around the idea of social, economic, and environmental responsibility. And later, they actually mapped that to the Sustainable Development Goals. But early on, one of the things they did is and because it came top down, Chuck was able to get the board of directors involved and approval of this. And then from there, unleashed innovation bottom up and middle out. And what he told me years later was that it was a great exercise in productivity.
Would you talk about that bottom up and middle out?
Sure. So one of the best ways that his work exemplifies this is during early years, he basically said, okay, I want everybody to look at whatever it is you do for the company and think about it from an environmentally responsible perspective and a socially responsible perspective. What does that look like? What do you see differently? What could we do different that we haven't thought of before? And one of the people on the shipping receiving ends made a very astute observation. He said, we take a lot of pride in that we recycle our cardboard boxes, but we're trucking in boxes of sand into the plant. Then we're emptying the sand. Abrasion from the sand destroys the cardboard boxes, so we can't use them again. So now we're collapsing the boxes and we're paying haul away fees to have them hauled away. And he said, look, there's a thing on the market called the super sack. It's kind of like a heavy duty burlap sack.
Yeah.
Designed for this sort of thing. And he said, we could use those. The cost would be minimal compared to the haul away fees and the boxes. And they're designed to last at least 12 months of heavy use. They made that switch. It saved them $600,000 the first year and then about $500,000 year on year after that. So right away, the CFO gets engaged. He said, wow, suddenly I like sustainability. And so this really transformed how they did this. So that was from the bottom up. It was somebody who was actually receiving the trucks of sand who made the original observation.
Yeah.
And now Chuck did caution. He said, not every idea becomes, incorporated into the way we do business. But the empowerment idea is that everybody is asked to bring their observations to their direct boss and then up the chain so that leadership actually sees, hey, we might be able to do some things differently. Yep. That have a triple bottom line effect, meaning they help us environmentally, socially, and financially.
Yes. That's awesome. That's a great story. And so give me a couple other kind of concepts that you want listeners to be aware of. So we've got leadership and influence, we've got strategy, we've got sustainability, and how these work together. Talk a little bit more about that application to business. This is fascinating.
Sure. Well, let me introduce to you all a framework that, and I will oversimplify it here, but I would encourage listeners to explore it more. I learned this from one of the members of my dissertation committee, a fellow named Dr. Francis Letham, and he had collaborated with Dr. William Smith. And in 1980, they had done this work at the time Francis was working for the World Bank. And so they had been looking at how come a lot of projects aren't as successful as we'd like them to be.
Okay.
And then with Francis at the World Bank, he said, well, how come a lot of our international development projects aren't as successful as we would like them to be? And they came up with this framework called the AIC framework, which stands for Appreciative, Influential, and Control.
Okay.
And the way I like to describe it for people to visualize is 3 concentric circles. The outer circle is the appreciative environment or the enabling environment. The center is the influential. And then the inner circle is the control sphere.
Okay.
And what they observed, and I've since used this as a tool to help guide businesses think about how they do what they do and how to embrace their external environments. And what they observed, Francis and William, was that most organizations, whether they're development organizations or private sector businesses, were making decisions in that control sphere.
Okay.
Because that's where they actually had power. They could make decisions, they could make budgetary allocations. But when decisions were made in that control sphere without knowledge or recognition of influence and appreciation, they often ended up with mediocre or lower than mediocre results. So they said, why don't we flip that around? What if we start by looking at the appreciation sphere? So just to simplify this, that would be if you want to open a business and you have to appreciate the institutional constraints that exist in that environment. So the legal frameworks. So if you decide you want to open a nightclub and you're working in where ordinances say you must be closed by midnight, you might say, maybe that's not the nightclub I want, the place I want to open the nightclub.
Yeah.
Or you're going to say it's going to be more of a day club. Right? In other words, you have to appreciate your job is not going to be to change those rules. Your job is to appreciate those rules. Now, in the influential sphere, you might find that there are organizations that are actively advocating to change those curfew rules so that you can have a nightclub that stays open longer.
Yeah, because the day club will be a little less popular.
That's right. And so what you're thinking then would be, maybe I can use my influence in that influential sphere to encourage that organization to advocate for what I want.
Yeah.
And so in that influence sphere, you're looking at how can I influence others and who can influence me, and then how might coalitions be formed.
Yeah.
And once you've identified all of those things, so you're identifying your stakeholders, both the appreciative stakeholders and the influential stakeholders, before you actually make decisions in that control sphere. And so then that really transforms how you think about what your company does and the context in which it operates.
Yes, 100%. Is this also a tool that's helping us think more systemically?
Oh, absolutely. Because by doing so, one of the things it helps you do is it looks at purpose and power.
Yeah.
So you're looking at those three components: appreciation, influence, and control. And then you're looking at who has the power in these different dynamics, who has the purpose, and how do we align purpose and power to accomplish a shared goal?
Yep.
And so the same thing happens when you are looking through systems, through a systems lens, and trying to create in strategy a shared vision. And then once you have that shared vision, how do we pull it closer to our present?
Yeah.
And this tool really helps you do that. It helps you as well think about different ways to understand stakeholders. So a lot of organizations now do stakeholder analyses or stakeholder mapping, and they'll ask at least two questions. They'll ask, who are the main stakeholders? And they'll ask, what are the interests of those stakeholders? But they often don't ask the third question, which is, what is the power of each stakeholder group?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Or the fourth question, which is, how are coalitions likely to form?
Yeah.
And the AIC framework helps you see that. It provides a visual tool that helps you see who's really available, who's in that influential sphere, with whom I might collaborate. And there's a lot of rhetoric now about public-private partnerships. And often that's misunderstood as, hello, private sector, please give money to our partnership. And to which either you have corporations that are resistant to that because that's not their business model to give away money, or they say yes, but they want to do it in finite amounts. They don't want to have this recurring, constant need to donate. So one of the things that we see in this idea of building partnerships is how can you do it where there's no direct cost to the company? In other words, it creates opportunities for company savings.
Yeah.
It creates benefits for the company as well as to the recipient.
Yep.
And I can give you a quick example of what that can look like.
Yeah, please do.
So years ago in Peru, I worked with a mining company, First Quantum Minerals, and they were trying to figure out how to approach community relations differently. And they were working in a remote area in the Andes where there was another large mine that had done a lot where they were looking at everything transactionally. And they ended up spending an awful lot of money and still not having communities that were content. So one of the things we started to explore was, what are the big needs? The company had bought the land for this mining project And embedded in what they purchased was a relocation. They were going to have to relocate families, which meant they were going to have to rebuild housing. And so we started looking at, well, when you do that, there are lots of complications, but one that we looked at was, how do you provide water and sewer to these new buildings that you'll have to produce? And the usual way to do that is to buy off-shelf components, toilets, showers, sinks, and then truck them to site.
Yeah.
What we found by looking through that AIC lens was that at the time, the Water and Sanitation Division of the World Bank was based in Lima, Peru. They had already created a series of what they called My Bathroom Kits that they had rolled out in pilot communities in 4 different parts of Peru.
Wow.
They wanted to bring this to scale. And so in conversations with them, they said, well, look, if you relocate these communities, and in doing so, if you would use our equipment, it's all sourced in country. So it's all domestically, the whole value chain is in country. So you're supporting the National Society of Industry, and you're supporting this local production. And we will provide the added value of bringing extension workers out to help use microfinance and train local people in the community to be the custodians of the system.
Nice.
What this did, the brilliance of this idea was that it would provide the private sector company with an exit strategy. So they were willing to put some money up front, and they were willing to invest in these systems, and they were even willing to help with some of the engineering designing on putting in the water system, but they didn't want to be plumbers for the life of the mine.
Yes.
And so here's a way that they could do this concept of partnerships, of alliance building, in ways that was good for the company, not just for the recipient of that alliance.
Yeah. Well, I just finished a really good book. I had a fun conversation for listeners. Check out the episode with Jeffrey Beeson. The book is called Network Leadership.
Nice.
And yeah, so his whole kind of approach to this work is the power of networks. And it sounds like this tool very nicely helps you tap into maybe even at times unsuspecting partnerships that you would never imagined, but it then creates an effect where that's so cool. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Oh, good, good.
Wayne, as we begin to wind down our time, what's another concept that you want listeners to be aware of as critical to this conversation around sustainability leadership? Is there another concept that comes to mind for you?
I would say around this concept of stakeholder engagement. So we talked a little bit just of stakeholder mapping, but I think in sustainability leadership, some of the easy things to do are around the low-hanging fruit of reducing water consumption, reducing energy use. But some of the more complicated components come from this idea of stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
So if we've really understand who those stakeholders are, how do we engage with them? How do we work with them? Internally, how do we really motivate employees? How do we use the tools of stakeholder engagement to actually increase productivity? Mm-hmm. By creating reasons for why do I come to work besides doing what I'm paid to do?
Yeah.
Is there a level of enthusiasm to what I do? Can I bring excitement with me? Do I feel gratitude that I get to work with these people on these projects? Or do I feel like this is a task I must complete because I need to earn a living?
Yes.
And there's a very different way, again, this idea of mindset. There's a different way of thinking. And so stakeholder engagement really can tie into that internally. And then externally also, when we talk about sustainability, it morphed out of corporate social responsibility. And some of that was heavy on corporate philanthropy.
Yes.
So we're a great company. We donated to this organization or that organization. And one of the ways that good stakeholder engagement helps a company is that it enables the company to say, we're a good company, but you don't have to take our word for it. We'd like you to ask some of these other organizations, and again, in our sphere of influence.
Yep.
And if they speak well of you, then it really elevates where you are in your ecosystem, in your community. It also elevates how your leaders are using influence and appreciation to achieve the goals that the organization wants them to achieve.
Yeah. So cool. Sir, what are a couple resources that you would point listeners to that have like stood out for you? I know we spoke about Firms of Endearment, a book that both of us have enjoyed, but are there a couple other resources? And maybe you could talk to Firms of Endearment if it is a resource that you would recommend
Sure.
people check out.
Well, I think certainly Firms of Endearment is helpful. It gives you a fundamental perspective of how to think more broadly about responsibility in business.
Yeah.
More recently, there's a book that I think is really helpful for this. It's called Full Spectrum Thinking:
Okay.
How to Escape Boxes in a Post-Categorical Future. And it's by Bob Johansen of the Institute for the Future out in California.
Okay.
And that book, it helps leaders break free of limiting labels and to see new gradients of possibility in what's otherwise a very chaotic world.
Yeah.
So it really helps you with interdisciplinary thinking.
Okay.
Yeah. So another that I was thinking about was The Man Who Broke Capitalism. And the subtitle there is How Jack Welch Gutted the Heartland and Crushed the Soul of Corporate America and How to Undo His Legacy.
Wow.
Heavy. It's by David Gels, who's a New York Times writer. And it's really great. It really puts in perspective, how did we get to this idea of having CEO celebrities and this huge discrepancy between CEO earnings and worker earnings? And how did that all come out of balance? And then what could we do to bring it back into balance? A third one would just be, and this is more looking at when we think about the energy transition, we can't not think about mining. And so there was a book that came out last year called The War Below.
Okay.
Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. It's by a guy named Ernest Schneider. I think is how he pronounces it. Scheyder.
Okay.
Ernest Schneider. And he writes for Reuters. But he uses storytelling to bring you into this concept of how do we make these decisions around trade-offs? What's more important, certain areas of land in pristine ecosystem style or as deposits of copper or lithium, and should we be extracting them or not? And I think he's very spot on in terms of what we should be thinking about over the next couple of decades.
Wow. Well, sir, thank you so much for giving us a broad overview and then helping us understand some of the resources that are available to us, because I think this is, at least for me, a bit of an intimidating topic because it's a whole world that I don't know of, but I feel like I understand it a little bit better because of our conversation today. And I very, very much appreciate it. But I also love kind of this interdisciplinary lens of leadership, strategy, sustainability. And then, of course, we've got systems thinking embedded in all of this that I love it. Quickly, before we wind down, I always ask guests what they've been listening to, reading, streaming, what's caught your attention in recent times. Now, it could have to do with something we've just discussed. It might have nothing to do with what we've discussed. But Wayne, what's been on the nightstand or the television or the iPad?
A couple of things. So a podcast your leaders might enjoy called Outrage and Optimism. And it's a climate podcast for people who are not willing to give up on making the world a better place. That's sort of their tagline.
Oh, I love it.
One of the people that runs it is the former climate change executive secretary, Cristina Figueres, who I had the great pleasure of meeting her in Lima, Peru at the COP20. So right before the Paris Climate Agreement, the year before. And she played an instrumental role in bringing that Paris Climate Agreement to fruition.
Nice.
So she's quite something. She's definitely worth time to listen to. There's another podcast that I don't know as well. I've only heard parts of it, but I've heard good things about it. And that is the Cleaning Up podcast. And that's really, and he interviews leaders in clean energy, mobility, climate finance, and sustainable development. And then lastly, as kind of a sideline, I just finished reading a book, an actual paper book called Ingrained. It's by a gentleman named Colin Robinson, who is a fine furniture woodworker in Scotland. And he does a great homage to the business and the artistry and craftsmanship of furniture making.
Wow.
And there's great wisdoms of leadership there. He runs his own small business, and he really gives you a sense for what it's like to be an entrepreneur in a field that requires him to work with his hands. And it was really a pleasure to read.
Oh, that's very cool. Awesome. Well, I will put a link to all of those in the show notes. So listeners, check out the show notes. You can find them there. Wayne, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate you. Appreciate how you think. For listeners, I know you appreciate that as well. It's pretty awesome. And you know what? Until next time, sir.
Well, thank you kindly. And once again, thank you, Scott. It's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate being included. You've got a great playlist.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot. Take care, sir.
All right, likewise. Bye now.
What a fun conversation. Truly enjoyed that dialogue. An expert in his field. Thank you so much, Wayne. Appreciate you. Appreciate all of you for listening, checking in, and staying curious. Great leaders are curious, and the research would back that up. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by. Be well. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.